Rabbi David, thank you for coming on the Mother of All Talk shows again. I'm glad that both of us are fans of the hat, and I'm glad to say if we can adjust your camera shot a little, we'll get a better view of your hat so that it can be compared with mine. That's it. Perfect. Rabbi, what are you thinking about the statement from Kamala Harris? There needs to be an immediate ceasefire, applause line, for at least 6 weeks. What's the meaning of that? How cynical is it? How likely is it to come to pass?
Well, it's completely cynical. I'm glad you asked that question. And what I think is 6 weeks from now is when the majority of the Democratic Party primaries will be over. So she's looking for a way for the Biden administration to look like it's doing something good so that people will come out and support it in the primaries, instead of getting the kind of votes that they've been getting like they did yesterday in Minnesota, where 20% of the Democrats who even bother going to the polls say that they're uncommitted. They don't support Joe Biden, right? So to say that they want a ceasefire or a pause for 6 weeks, and then, yeah, you can start killing them again after 6 weeks when the primaries are over. It's totally cynical. And if they wanted a ceasefire, they could just pull Israel's chain and Israel would have to stop. The weapons, the bombs, everything comes from the US, paid for by US taxpayers, forced into it by the Biden administration. They can make it stop in a day if they want it.
Elsewhere in North America, we'll come back to Gaza, but elsewhere in North America, there's breaking news that Canada is going to refund UNRWA. All these countries that on Israel's fake allegations cancelled their subscriptions and subventions to UNRWA, the main source of food, of medicine, of schooling, of all services in the Gaza Strip. All these countries that stopped paying on what turned out to be an entirely bogus set of Israeli allegations that named UNRWA personnel were involved in the events of October the 7th. I mean, we're glad if it's true that Canada are resuming, but what does it tell you about these Western governments that they stopped paying on such baseless allegations?
They're just subservient to Zionist interests. I think the leadership of these countries is afraid of losing support of Zionist donors. That's what I think it is. Just the very next day after Israel made those allegations, which was the day that the International Court of Justice upheld South Africa's claim, that day is when Israel released this kind of fake information that was never backed up by anything. And that day, countries like Canada and others immediately stopped supporting UNRWA, as you said. And now Canada is resuming it. I think another thing we can learn from that is how important it is for us to keep up the pressure on our government. The minister responsible for this, who I'll just say, shamefully, he's from a Muslim country. He's very supported. He was supported by Muslim Canadians who were proud of him to become a minister. He was booed and he was harassed and he was followed around and he couldn't go to meetings and he had to shut down his events, and this went on and on and on with so much pressure. So finally, they are resuming $25 million of support for UNRWA this month, and they said they'll continue to support UNRWA as they should.
Well, protest works, Rabbi. That's why they're trying to shut it down in your country and in mine, and more of that coming up later, I'm sure. Going back then to the situation in Gaza, how did you view the, for me, grotesque spectacle of American-supplied bombs raining down on the Gaza Strip whilst on the beach actually more often in the sea, were landing American parachutes with enough packed lunches for just 28,000 people out of 2.3 million, and just once on one day. This is almost obscene, isn't it?
It's bizarre theater. That's all it is. Again, the U.S. could just snap its fingers and make Israel open up the two border crossings where thousands of trucks have been sitting for months. There are thousands of trucks loaded with food, medical supplies, housing, and they're being held up by the Netanyahu government with complete complicity from the U.S. So airdropping food is, it's beyond theater. It's, to me, I thought it was like during deer hunting season, airdropping bales of hay. So the deer would come out of the forest and the hunters could shoot them, because that's what happened. Starving people ran to get food and were shot dead. I got a message from a woman in Gaza who I've been helping and supporting for months, saying that her 18-year-old nephew, this was yesterday, George, this happened just yesterday, her 18-year-old nephew went to get flour from one of these things and he was shot dead, an 18-year-old boy. And his mother's left alone because his father was killed previously. So the U.S. wanted to get food to Palestinians. It could do it like right away. It could just do it.
Wow. Rabbi, I'm not blowing smoke at you. I think that Jews like you that oppose all of this are the bravest people on the earth, particularly there in Israel. It's a small number, but it is amongst the most courageous in the world. I'm talking about religious Jews like you and secular Jews like Miko Peled and others. What is it like being in the Jewish community, but taking the line that you're taking?
Okay, I have to like hold off on that idea that we're the most courageous people in the world. We're not. We're totally not. There are people living in Gaza and other Palestinians in the West Bank and Palestinians in refugee camps all over the Middle East, and many, 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 many other people manifest far more courage than it takes for someone like me, living in a very comfortable situation, to just speak out and say what has to be said, right? So I appreciate the intention of what you said, but I can't let that pass. I refuse to accept that compliment. But you ask, why is it so difficult? Oh man, over the last few decades, actually, even in the course of my lifetime that I can remember, Judaism and Jewish institutions have been really taken over by Zionism and by the supremacy of Israel, to the point where right now, if somebody wanted to join a synagogue and they say, I want to join this synagogue, but I don't believe in God and I don't keep the Sabbath, and I eat pork and I never pray, but I want to be a member of the synagogue. They're, oh, welcome. Of course, we want you. Just come in and join us. But a person who's been a member of a synagogue for 20 or 30 years and says, what Israel's doing, that's genocide. I can't support it. That person's going to be ostracized and removed from the synagogue. I mean, I know many people. People are contacting me as a rabbi saying that's happened to them, that part of their life is being in a synagogue and now there's no place for them to go. So I'm making the point that Jewish institutions, tragically, synagogues, have been really like occupied by Zionism. And to stand up against that is difficult. I don't know how much courage or bravery it takes, but it's difficult. And there are many, many, many of us. And we, I think, will become the majority of Jews. I don't know if we'll be able to replicate large, influential institutions, but it's, that is coming. And right now, it's like an emotional struggle for many Jewish people because they can be
Well,
very
it
easily.
must be. It must be.
Yeah.
And I stand corrected for the reasons that you gave. I suppose I'm
No.
thinking about the moral courage to be a dissident in such an overwhelming, hegemonic sea of Zionism. And you make the point that one day, God willing, you'll be the majority. I'm not old enough to remember, but I'm a historian enough to remember when once upon a time you were the majority. It's a little known fact that the only Jewish member of the British cabinet of Prime Minister Arthur Balfour, who made the infamous Balfour Declaration, the only Jewish cabinet member at that time opposed the Balfour Declaration. And at that time, the great majority of Jews were socialists, communists, leftists, progressives. They were the greatest people on the earth, actually, at that time. And Zionism represented a tiny sliver of Jewish opinion at the time that the Balfour Declaration was made.
That's right. Even when I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s in America, in the Reform Jewish movement, people were opposed to Zionism. There was no adulation of Israel. Even the reason why Reformed temples are called temples was to make the point that the temple that was destroyed in Jerusalem by the Romans in the year 70, close to 2,000 years ago, is gone. And the synagogue that's here in our town that we go to, the place where we go, that's really the temple. We don't need to replace that old one. We're not yearning to go back to where it was, right? The place where we live, that's our home, right? And what we do there, that's our religious activity. So instead of actually calling it a synagogue, they call it a temple. That's where that comes from. And Zionism wasn't that popular, really, I think, until after 1967, in the 70s. You can see it coming on. And now it's become, in the mainstream Jewish institutions, it is the absolutely dominant position, but it didn't always be that way, and it doesn't need to be that way. And I don't imagine in the next generation it will be. Very, very few young Jewish people with a conscience, young Jewish people who know what Judaism's really about, or even what basic morality is about, feel any attachment to Israel. There was a survey done in the US in 2021, before the last time Israel attacked Gaza so horribly and killed over 2,000 innocent people. Before that, there was a survey done by the Jewish Electorate Institute that just does surveys of Jews for their political views. And it showed that 40% of Jews, 20% of Jews under the age 40 think that Israel should not exist. That was 3 years ago. I can't imagine what it is now. So this is not going to go on. It's going to go on too long. It needs to have already stopped, but it's not going to just go on and on. It will change.
Rabbi David, you're a very, very bright, shining star, and I'm glad that you shared your wisdom with us here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Thanks very much for joining us. Rabbi David Mivasair, a retired activist rabbi and political commentator.